So it's either we don't know about it, we know about it and we don't care about it, or we know about it and we want to destroy it.
Is there a connection between autism and narcissism? Could your narcissistic partner actually be autistic? Well, to answer that question today, Erica Little-Herron's joining us to talk about the differences between narcissism and autism. So I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Erica Little-Herron, who is known on TikTok. What really attracted me to your content, Erica, was you go into a lot of depth about what it's like to be autistic. And lately, there's been increased interest in the connection, if there is one, between narcissism and autism. And in fact, some people have been stepping up and saying that maybe their partner isn't narcissistic, they're just a misunderstood autistic person. So I was thrilled to have you on today so that we can talk about what that is. Let's start off helping us understand maybe what autism actually is for anyone who's vague or unclear about it. And I know I just asked you a massively big question, but what would you say to somebody if you had to summarize it in a paragraph or less?
Say it's a neurotype difference. It's a disability that is not necessarily, especially when you're younger, it doesn't necessarily always feel like a disability. It is often experienced by others as a social deficit, difficulty interacting with others. It tends to also come with various sensory issues. And to the point of you saying that it is a massive question, what's unique about autism is that it is very heterozygous, meaning that if you plot almost any other group of individuals, any trait that they have, let's say selfishness, then you're going to get like a bell curve. You're going to get the people who have the most, and you'll have something gradual. When it comes to autistic people, it will be a valley because we are a people of extremes. So almost anything that you try to pin down about an autistic person and say, this is the quintessential autistic presentation that you're going to see, there's almost always an exception. But generally speaking, social deficits, which are interpreted as social deficits in the society we're in, that's a whole other can of worms, and sensory issues are your big ones.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Do you find that? Yeah, I agree. Because one of the things I was aware of when you were saying is like the experience of pain. One of the things I recently came across is autistic people have a unique experience with their own bodies. Some of them are hypersensitive and others are hyposensitive.
Or both in the same person. Something like a tag on a shirt can actually genuinely be experienced as pain, but then you can have a broken limb and not be screaming. I fell out of a tree once when I was like 6 and broke 3 bones and didn't cry. And so nobody believed me. But meanwhile, like I cried over the texture of a washcloth I didn't like. So
yeah, you reminded me. I broke a thumb and didn't go get help either for that because I didn't know I broke my thumb.
Yeah.
It wasn't that big of a deal to me. But yet I'm very sensitive to other things as well. For those who don't know, I'm autistic. Late diagnosed autistic woman.
You know, one thing that I frequently see on my page, we talk a lot about in the comment sections anyway, not on purpose, about ADHD and autism as 2 separate things and how a lot of people who are narcissistic might tell their spouse, I'm not narcissistic or I'm not abusive, I'm just neurodivergent in some capacity. And I wonder if there's some struggles with empathy that seems to be the connection. To me, it feels like an excuse. And I think to your point, you could be both. My abuser was in fact diagnosed both narcissist and ADHD. So he absolutely was both. But do you think that there's any connection to the lack of empathy that sort of makes that something that they can ride on and claim that they're not narcissistic or not abusive?
Yeah. So that's a big one. For the longest time, part of the reason that I did not believe that it would never even remotely occur to me that I was autistic was because the narrative in the culture at large and from the experts on autism was that we do not feel empathy. And in some cases went so far as to say that we don't feel love. And so knowing that I felt hyper empathy, I like to call it like autistic osmosis, that a lot of autistic people, especially people raised as female, will walk into a room and suddenly feel a lot of emotions that aren't theirs. And it's not anything magical. It's that we take in more sensory data because we have more connections in our brains, but we don't necessarily sort those so well. So they kind of go into these vague piles in our brains. So we will sense the vibes of the room and take those on, but not know why they're there, not know what the expected reaction is, and not know how to name them. So if everybody else in the room is cranky, we might suddenly find ourselves cranky when we were happy 2 seconds ago. And then we make things more awkward by like going, hey, why is everybody feeling so tense right now? And then people point at that and go, you're not empathetic, because if you were empathetic, you would see that there was tension in the room and you wouldn't be calling it out, making everybody upset. But the problem wasn't that I wasn't feeling empathy. The problem was that I did not know how to respond to the emotion in a way that Aulistics would consider acceptable. And that's the missing piece with autistic people. And we call it the double empathy problem, is that we do not respond to the empathy that we're feeling in the way that is expected in Aulistic society. Aulistic, by the way, if you're not familiar with the term, is anybody who is not autistic. And the way that we show empathy can look very narcissistic from an Aulistic perspective. So we've got different kinds of empathy, right? And I'm just going to focus on 2. We have cognitive empathy, which is sort of, I cognitively understand that you are in pain and I understand why. And you might reflect back to them and say, oh, I'm sorry you're going through this. I see that this is really hard. But you are not taking those emotions on. You are not feeling the pain with the individual. And when they say, oh, I'm feeling so alone with this, you're not going, well, this one time 10 years ago, my grandma also died. And what I did in that situation, blah, blah, blah. A narcissist will often do something similar, that they want to one up you. They want to make it about them, that they're the ones who are really suffering. Whereas the exact same behavior in an autistic person is saying, you are not alone in this. Like, I am down in the trenches with you. I am going back to my own memories of similar suffering so that I have a framework in which to engage in emotional, also known as affective empathy, where I am perspective taking and getting down into that feeling with you. It's very emotionally expensive. It's very exhausting. Aulistics don't necessarily generally enjoy receiving autistic/emotional/affective empathy because it can feel invasive. It can feel as if we are centering ourselves when in reality, we're living by the golden rule. So this is actually a thing where we don't want cognitive empathy because it feels cold. So we also don't give that back to other people. But the difference being that those of us who are able to do high masking and who do develop a special interest in other people and psychology and trying to figure out why we feel alien and why the world works the way that it does, we go out of our way to learn how to comfort the people that we care about in a way that they receive as comforting. But what's upsetting to me is that that's very rarely reciprocated, and that autistic people, especially children that are diagnosed early, are taught to replicate holistic ways of bonding and comforting. And that is not given back. It would be fine. Like, we should adapt to the needs of our loved ones, especially when they're in pain. But I feel like that should be a two-way street. Now, a narcissist can have cognitive empathy. Like, they can, and that's where you get into like dark empath territory, right? They are able to analyze you and pinpoint every little pain point. They're not feeling that with you, though. They are not getting into the weeds with you. And the point of it is to use it to manipulate you to get to what they want. So you have to look at the whole picture of behavior.
The best way I heard it described is instrumental.
That's it.
Instrumental
I had that written down, but I was like, I'm not going through all of
it. So you're describing, you're describing instrumental, which is, you sense it. They're very good at mind mapping. And because they're so highly skilled at it, they're able to then use that in a weaponized way against the person that they're picking up their feelings.
Because that's how they're getting to the narcissistic side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas autistic people aren't that sophisticated, frankly. But one of the other things that I've noticed, and it's interesting because it's one of the ways I usually clock somebody who's narcissistic, is that their constricted affect. Their face does not convey a whole range of emotional nuances, that they tend to be kind of, we almost call it in the psychiatric realm, a blunt affect, or it's kind of almost their face is a blank screen. They're not revealing a whole lot of what they're feeling. And that can come across to other people as cold or not connecting. And I think that narcissists are also very good at that too. And they're doing it because they're actually hiding who they are, hiding what they're feeling. What's your thoughts about that? Have you kind of noticed that as well? And
so In my area of expertise is mostly autism. I would say that my expertise is autism and my hyper focus was narcissism. So in my experience, narcissists and high masking autistics are both capable of masking and of emoting if it's going to get them what they want. Whereas like autistics are usually doing it like primarily out of survival. Having a shallow affect is a common trait in autism. And when we are out masking, we realize that we have to overproject our emotions for our facial expressions to be read correctly. And because studies have shown that allistics respond to just autistic faces alone, not even counting our actual behaviors, within minutes of being around an autistic person, many allistics report having an uncanny valley reaction. It is not human. Worse yet, for a lot of people who experience the uncanny valley feeling, the follow-up feeling is kill it. So many times we find that like people are instantly aggressive, and not only instantly aggressive, but extremely distrustful. And they don't know why they feel that way. They're not looking at your face and saying there's something wrong with her face. They're not looking at you and going, you're autistic. So, they just know that something feels wrong. They were told to trust their guts. And now they're looking to reverse engineer a reason for why they feel that way. And so they're going to be like watching everything very carefully. And because we are so accustomed to being treated with that level of suspicion, we do a lot of things to try to gain the trust of others and to deserve, more importantly, the trust of others, including trying to learn how to project facial expressions that look like theirs. But it never quite lands. It never quite looks just right. And something is still niggling in the back of their heads that this doesn't feel entirely natural. This feels a little bit put on. And that correlates with the same kind of threat response that very attuned, attentive people experience when they're around a narcissist. So you're experiencing a threat response in both cases, and it's not your fault. It's just the monkey brain part of you. But it is important to like unpack that, step back and go, okay, I need additional evidence beyond that initial feeling, because autistic people actually are more likely to have less muscle tone in our faces and to actually have less range of motion in our faces, especially like the upper face. And so that can give off wrong vibes. Now, that will not be the case when you encounter other autistic people or other people who are ADHD. For reasons unknown, ADHD people and autistic people tend to kind of vibe, and we tend to intermarry. I myself am a product of that. I'm an ADHDer, so I'm autistic and ADHD, which is part of the reason that I'm very outgoing. And we are like the bridge builders of the autistic community. We're the ones that like, we take the people out of the house that are at home with their cats and wish they could have friends but are afraid to. And we like shove them in a room with another autistic and like, yeah. Or we translate for our autistic loved ones to the allistic world to help them understand like what's going back and forth between them.
I'm laughing because I stepped out of my house this morning. It's like, oh, so this is the temperature outside. I haven't been out for a few days.
I posted a picture of me touching grass just because I was like, I'm tired of hearing this. And I'm tired of you guys being right about it.
So let me ask you though, in my comment section, what I often see is my abuser tells me that he is not abusive, he is autistic. My abuser tells me that he is not abusive, he has ADHD, he's just neurodivergent. How can people tell the difference? Because I know there can be coexisting and I know there's a little bit of overlap here and there, but I think that fundamentally, like the intention is so different.
Yes.
The motivations
yes,
are
the
so
intention
different.
is
How
so
can
different.
People tell.
So one would be grandiosity, that autistic people will admit when we're good at something, but we are equally capable of being humble. I might say, I'm really good at makeup. And that might sound like grandiosity to some people. That might sound like just braggadocio, and it might seem very similar to narcissism. But in the next sentence, you might hear me, also admit that I don't know my way around a computer, and not devalue the skill of making my way around a computer, but own the fact that I'm not good at everything. And that's okay. And then also, I don't need to be the center of attention, that I might be extremely outgoing and loud. ADHDers tend to fit that description and tend to be gregarious and outgoing. However, we don't have to be the center of attention. So that would be one of the things. And if an autistic person does not also have that ADHD that sort of like softens out some of the less social aspects of autism, then it's much more apparent because just like pure autistics tend to be less social overall, which gives less opportunity for grandiosity, honestly. Another would be envy. While we are fully capable of envy, it rarely has anything to do with hierarchy. So we might like someone's Gucci bag, but it's not going to be because we want more status. Hierarchy is not really a thing for us. Even if we are cognizant of it, like someone with persistent drive for autonomy, also known as pathological demand avoidance, highly attuned to hierarchy and aware of power dynamics because they scare us. Even if we are highly aware of it, we want to burn it down. So it's either we don't know about it, we know about it and we don't care about it, or we know about it and we want to destroy it. But we're never trying to claw our way to the top to hurt somebody unless we are also narcissistic. So that would be one way. Egocentricity. Yeah. So this can look similar where we will have sensory overload sometimes and have a hard time taking in other people's experiences. And in that way, kind of like get wrapped up in our own heads. But we are also capable of giving focused attention and care to somebody else, as opposed to, in my experience, narcissists, that does not. Feelings of shame and inadequacy. This probably doesn't need elaboration. I mean, the society tells autistics every day that we are inadequate. And while shame can happen in narcissists, I think we both know that presents very differently. That my shame will present as genuine remorse and regret, and that I am willing to listen, empathize, apologize, and problem solve. I am willing to say, I did this thing. I should have known better because of this information. It affected you in this way. I'm very sorry. Here's the steps I'm going to take to make sure it doesn't happen again. And here's some ideas that I have to repair the harm that I caused. Do you also have some things? Obviously that might take a lot longer than that, but also like sitting and listening to the pain that I caused. A narcissist will never do that. They will never sincerely do that. There will always be some way in which it's always going to be like, oh, I'm sorry you feel that way or whatever. Impulsivity, both are capable of impulsivity if there is ADHD with it. But if the ADHD piece is not there, autistics are not impulsive. So they don't share that with narcissists. Dysregulated rage, it's important to understand the difference. If an autistic person is experiencing a meltdown, which can be violent, if they are a level 1 autistic, somebody like me, and they are at this point in their life and they are causing harm to other people during their meltdowns, and they're not taking steps to, like for me personally, I have figured out what are my tells. And I have put in my emergency systems of how do I get away from everybody? And if I can't get away from anybody, what things can I do to calm my body? And also, what can I do to make repairs ahead of time? Hey, mama's feeling really dysregulated. I might cry a lot. It is in no way your fault. It's best not to talk to mama. Mama's a little overwhelmed, but it's not your fault. And big feelings are safe. That people who care about the people who are around them when they get close to that stage are taking the time to try to make sure that they're not harming other people. They're not using it as an excuse to hurt other people. The sense of victimhood, we are actually victimized. So that can be, you get with vulnerable narcissists, the woe is me, the world is after me, and every time that something goes right, it's because they did it. And everything that goes something wrong is because everybody else did it to them. Whereas an autistic person will spend time asking themselves, in what way did I affect the situation? They'll look at okay, the criticism that I'm getting, what's the source coming from? Is it from somebody whose general moral framework I respect? They'll go through a roster to try to figure out, do I need to actually internalize the criticism that I'm receiving? Or is this on them? A narcissist isn't going to do that. It's always like, woe is me, I don't deserve this. Alexithymia, both can seem, so narcissists can have trouble identifying their own emotions, but a lot of that is self-imposed defense, right? They have locked away their emotions because any kind of negative emotion feels like a weakness and vulnerability, and they sneer at that. Whereas autistic people will have a hard time identifying emotions because ours just look different. and they don't fit a lot of the descriptions that Aulistics handed to us. I mean, least of all, like our facial expressions, like we could be in agonizing pain and be shallow affect, and you might not see anything. We could even be smiling. So it's very, interoception is a problem of like knowing what's happening in my body, that I might have a hard time knowing that I need to urinate, that I have to eat, that I am sad, that I might be in the middle of a grocery store and find myself crying out of nowhere. And I don't know what I'm even sad about. I thought I was fine until 2 seconds ago, but I've disassociated from the overwhelm of being autistic and taking in too much sensory data. And so eventually you just kind of like leave your body. And in doing so, you leave the access and the ability to identify those emotions. But it's a very different mechanism by which we have a hard time identifying emotions, as opposed to narcissists who don't really want to know what's in there besides the fabulousness. You know, they want to know how great they are, but that's about it. I would say that suspicion and paranoia is a big thing. When we are suspicious or paranoid, start writing down how often we're right. That scoreboard is going to fill up pretty quick. We end up in the Cassandra syndrome a lot, where we will predict things and people will tell us, no, that's not the case. And then over and over and over and over, we're proven correct. And it's not because we're smarter. It's because we are excellent at pattern recognition. We have more connections in our brain. And I'm not a naughty supremacist. I don't think that we're inherently like better or the next stage in evolution, any of that trash. But because of those additional connections, it enables us to draw correlations that others don't see. There's a spider web fractal bottom-up thinking capacity that we have. So we might seem paranoid because we will see things that other people don't. And sometimes we're not even aware of it on a conscious level. We just are registering something in the background and going, something seems awry there. If, however, you are finding that this person is suspicious and paranoid, and it seems like they're projecting their own worldview on everybody else, i.e., everybody's out to get me. Everybody's out to get what they want out of everybody else. Everybody wants to get one up on me. But you're seeing in their everyday behavior that that's what they do to everybody else. That is absolutely not the case. And that they will accuse somebody of trying to take advantage of them when that's not the case. Autistics are famously gullible. And it's not always that we're just gullible. Sometimes it's just that we want to give the benefit of doubt that we aren't given. So even if we sense that there's something wrong, that the amount of pain that we've experienced from being treated with such suspicion causes us to go out of our way to not make other people feel like that, which is how we keep ending up with narcissists in our lives who can take advantage of us, because we would always rather give people the benefit of the doubt because, again, the golden rule is very important to us. We give what we want to receive.
And this is going to be the last question before we move to the podcast extra. But do you think that the fact that narcissists are now trying to jump onto the bandwagon of autism as the explanation for their bad behavior, is that putting our autistic people at greater risk of more misunderstanding?
Yeah. Oh, God, yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Sweet Jesus. Yeah. And at the same time, I want to tie this back in with the alt-right pipeline. And we can see it in tech autocracy stuff that's going on in politics right now. And a lot of, especially our young men, we have a disproportionate number of autistic men who have proficiencies in highly skilled areas like tech. And for that and a lot of other reasons, the alt-right is constantly actively recruiting our men because they make very devoted soldiers, because the autistic sense of justice, which can be twisted in exactly the wrong direction and makes us sound like angels when we are not. Our sense of justice can be women owe me a date. That can be your sense of justice. Like your sense of justice can be wrong. And narcissists conflating themselves with us and mixing themselves with us. But at the same time, I really do want to emphasize the fact that autistics can absolutely be narcissists without a doubt.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this. This has been really, really wonderful. How can people find you? And then I'm going to talk about what the podcast extra is going to be in a second. But
sure.
Where can people go to find more about your content and what you're talking about?
Sure. I am on Instagram, but I'm mostly on TikTok. I am at basically Linda Belcher. I am going to be moving over to YouTube probably if TikTok goes down to some degree. And that's, I
You
will
have the
be
same
more
handle?
of my community. Yeah,
Yeah.
basically Linda Belcher. I'm trying to keep it the same everywhere. And even if I don't continue to make content after TikTok goes down, then I look forward to just meeting more of my community and put people up on stage.
I appreciate that. So here's the podcast extra topic. It's that autistic people are particularly very vulnerable to narcissists. And I'd love to talk about why autism makes us very gullible or susceptible to narcissistic abuse. So let's hop over there and talk about that different angle. So thank you so much, Erica. This is timely and I could talk forever. I really appreciate this a lot.
Thank you. Thanks for I'm so excited to get to info dump about this and not have it be an inconvenience, honestly.
Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. Or you can learn more about me and my resources, such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.